Greatness always starts with an idea. The idea should remain malleable to create something of longevity. It is ever-changing and yet remains faithful to its core values, to bring positive change, to bring hope, to bring fun.
Well, I have a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
2, 1, game begin.
On September 23, 1889, Fusajiro Yamauchi began manufacturing hanafuda, Japanese playing cards of floral design. Fusajiro was born in Kyoto, and it was here that he established Nintendo Koppai. Koppai meaning playing cards in Japanese. During such time, a widespread ban on playing cards swept through Japan due to their ties with gambling, foreign trade, and usage by the Yakuza.
Nintendo is one of the world's biggest gaming companies. They're a Japanese company and they've actually been going for well over 100 years now. They started making playing cards, but they really reached their stride in the 80s and 90s when they started releasing arcade machines and then home consoles. And that was about the same time as well when we got introduced to their biggest franchises like Mario and Luigi, Legend of Zelda and Kirby.
As you can see, they're a bit smaller than the Western playing cards that we're used to, and they're printed with beautiful flower patterns and scenes from nature.
Nintendo's earliest and best customers were the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza. They ran lots of illegal gambling dens and they needed playing cards. And because no one wanted cheating going on, every game started with a new pack of cards. So Nintendo had a great business early on because these gangsters would buy cards, they'd open the cards, play a game, throw them away, get a new set of playing cards. So it was a good business to get into.
Yamauchi found great success in his newfound company. Before long, he had established a new shop in Osaka and began to develop a more comprehensive array of card games. It was in 1929 when Yamauchi decided to step down from the company, passing the business to his son-in-law Sekirio Kaneda, who adopted the name Sekirio Yamauchi in respect of the family. Fusajiro remained uninvolved with the company for the remainder of his life, eventually passing away from a stroke in his home city of Kyoto on January 1, 1940.
The founder of the company continued until 1929 when his son-in-law, Sekirio Kaneda, who took the name Yamauchi as well, took over the company and kind of professionalized it, improved the manufacturing processes, and started manufacturing Western-style playing cards.
War has struck again.
After World War II, Japan was in ruins. It was US occupied. There wasn't much food. The buildings were flattened. I mean, the country had to rebuild from absolute scratch. And from that came this kind of, essentially a new start. It tried to move into electronics and that was really kind of where Japan found a new future post-war.
The years following World War II allowed Japan to further its industrialization. Markets for electronics were established alongside the rise of strip mills for iron and steel. Among such technological innovations were transfer machines for the automobile industry, automatic control systems in new steam power stations, and catalytic cracking in oil refining industries.
Akihabara is an electronics district in Tokyo, and it became like the hub of electronics shops. You'd have these kind of multi-story arcades and shops selling all kinds of electronics. It was really a kind of very kind of geeky mecca, if you like. You know, if you were into electronics and you were in Tokyo, you're going to make a beeline for that area.
After the death of Sekiryo, Hiroshi Yamauchi, the grandson of Fusajiro, was ordered to step up and assume the mantle of company president. Being young and inexperienced, Hiroshi suffered some initial backlash from the company's employees.
In 1949, Sekiryo became ill, called up his grandson to his hospital bed, and said, "Okay, you give up your law degree and take over Nintendo from me." That was Hiroshi Yamauchi. And over the course of the next 50 years, he was destined to turn Nintendo into a multinational conglomerate. But at the beginning, it wasn't so easy.
Strikes would take place to test the new president's dedication to the role, and firmly, Hiroshi would make a stand. He chose to fire a handful of employees and set his eyes on the future. With a traditional imperialist demeanor, Hiroshi ran the company intending to keep up with the changing times. The first step was to develop a new style of plastic playing cards influenced by Western markets. However, due to Japan's strict restrictions on unsanctioned gambling, the plastic and Hanafuda cards were now struggling to make a profit. Luckily, the company, now called Nintendo Karuta, made a licensing deal with Walt Disney to merge the new plastic cards into family-oriented games. With a small booklet outlining the many games one could play with the cards, the new product would sell 600,000 units in 1 year, allowing Nintendo to dominate the card game market in its own country.
They also had a deal with Disney that allowed them to make Disney playing cards
that had Disney characters on them. And so this sort of made Nintendo kind of take a little sidestep into manufacturing things for children, wherein they discovered, hey, there's a lot of money to be made here. And so that was another stepping stone on the way to them creating video games, which at that time were basically considered toys.
Once again, the company name was changed to the Nintendo Company Limited, and the business was made public with Hiroshi Yamauchi as its chairman.
So at the beginning, Hiroshi Yamauchi was only 21 years old, and the workers in Nintendo didn't necessarily take him entirely seriously. He was really ambitious and really ruthless. He fired anyone that disagreed with him.
Visiting Cincinnati in the United States provided Hiroshi with some disappointing yet valuable information. He'd gone to examine the world's largest manufacturer of playing cards, the U.S. Playing Card Company. However, on his arrival, a small office and factory greeted him. To Hiroshi, the scale of the facility represented the success of the playing card industry, and there wasn't much to be seen. Concerned for the company's future, Hiroshi returned to Japan in search of new ways to ensure the longevity of Nintendo.
After Nintendo had established themselves making these playing cards, they tried a bunch of different things before they landed on what would eventually make them so successful. So they tried a whole range of different companies, including taxis and even love hotels.
He went into the food business, making instant rice, and he went into the taxi business. And that one seemed to go okay until there was a labor revolt, and that was the end of that idea.
So by the early 70s, Nintendo was struggling. It spent a fortune trying all these businesses, getting nowhere, and had a lot of debt.
The outlandish ventures proved unsuccessful for the business and were soon disbanded. The company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Desperately searching for ideas, Hiroshi spotted a factory engineer called Gunpei Yokoi.
Around that time, Hiroshi visited one of the factories and saw Gunpei playing with an extendable claw, a toy which he'd invented himself. And instead of telling him off for that, he was fascinated by this and asked him to put these extendable claws into manufacture.
The Ultra Hand was distributed and became a massive hit. Such simplistic ingenuity spurred new ideas for the company. Soon, a toy department was made in Kyoto, solely led by Gunpei, who would develop new concepts such as the love tester and the light gun. By the 1960s, Nintendo had solidified itself as a significant player in the toy market. The early 70s came rolling in, and with it, the idea of a video game was being conceptualized.
Around that time, in the early 70s, video games were becoming a really big thing. Pong had come out in 1972, and suddenly video games were cool.
Atari became the first in the race, releasing Pong in 1972. It was inspired by a game developed by physicist William Higginbotham. Atari leapt towards mainstream distribution, giving the public a groundbreaking discovery which took America by storm. Nintendo had to react fast. Hiroshi hired employees from Sharp Electronics to develop a new system that could compete with the emerging video game consoles. Soon, in cooperation with Mitsubishi Electric, the TV Color 6 was made and distributed in June 1977.
So after Nintendo had been going for quite a long time, they really started to branch out into the burgeoning gaming world. So at the time, arcade machines were hugely popular around the world. Atari had already been producing them for quite a while. Classics like Pong had been around for a little bit of time, but they were really starting to take off in Japan, in America, and in Europe. So Nintendo decided that they would try and get in on this really expanding market as well. And when they did, they really worked on how they were going to make a game that would stand out.
But it wasn't actually meant to be Nintendo's console. Mitsubishi had created it for another company that went bust and decided to give Nintendo a call, see if they'd put it out instead. And that's how Nintendo got into video games.
So Nintendo's very first console, or games console, was actually the Color TV game. It was a very, very simple device. But it paved the way. I think Shigeru Miyamoto, who would go on to make some of Nintendo's most important games, did actually work on the Color TV game. I think he designed like the outer casing or something really random like that. So it paved the way for one Shigeru Miyamoto to then go on to design Donkey Kong.
In response, Atari returned with the 2600, popularizing microprocessor-based hardware and games stored on swappable ROM cartridges. It was the most popular second-generation console by a large margin during the time of release. Nintendo would follow with 4 more iterations of the TV Color, and soon both Atari and Nintendo were being recognized as big fish in a huge pond, and competitiveness was on the rise.
見るテレビから遊べるテレビへ15種類ものゲームが楽しめるカラーテレビゲーム15
In response to America's growing arcade market, Hiroshi expanded Nintendo into the US, releasing new titles such as Radar Scope, Space Fever, and Sheriff. Though effective in the Japanese market, the games weren't financially successful in America. To counter this, Hiroshi turned to Shigeru Miyamoto, and upon deliberation, Donkey Kong was made, becoming a smash hit in both countries.
The arcade machine that they came out with was Donkey Kong, which is obviously one of their most famous franchises, and starred the main character of Jumpman, who was originally actually a carpenter, but he would eventually become our most beloved Nintendo character, Mario, who's actually a plumber now. But the idea was that as he was a carpenter, the level was based around kind of like a workman sort of environment, where he's dodging barrels from a big gorilla, also called Donkey Kong. And this just took off across the world. It was a really fantastic arcade machine, and kids loved to play it. And that was really the start of how Nintendo managed to dominate the gaming market at that time.
So Shigeru Miyamoto is probably one of the most important video game designers there's ever been. He is a producer, a creative director, a game developer, a game designer, and he created much of Nintendo's early output. So he created Mario, he created Donkey Kong, he created The Legend of Zelda. So his contribution to the games industry really can't be understated.
He's kind of like the Michelangelo of video games, if you like. He joined Nintendo out of art school, and really brought kind of, the whole Nintendo style as we know it really kind of emerged from him and what he did. And he always wanted to make games that appeal to everyone. They were never aimed at kids, they were never aimed purely at adults. It was about games for everyone to enjoy, and games that were very much about joy, and happiness. It was kind of a very kind of bright, optimistic kind of style he brought.
Hiroshi instituted 3 separate innovation and development facilities under the Nintendo banner. This unique method would allow each department to outplay the other within the company, constantly guaranteeing new, innovative results. In 1979, Gunpei Yokoi conceived the idea of a handheld video game while sitting on the bullet train on a business trip.
So around 1979, the story goes that Gunpei was commuting and he saw on the train Japanese businessmen playing with LCD calculators.
At that time, you have to remember, there's not much entertainment you can carry with you. You can have a newspaper, a magazine, a book. If you don't have any of those, you can stare out the window. So there's not much choice of what to do. And he notices further down the carriage, there's this guy with a pocket calculator, which is, pretty high tech for the late 70s. And he's just playing around with the calculator to pass the time. And so Gunpei kind of thinks, hang on, what if I took technology of a pocket calculator, turned it into a game? That would be something people could take, and it could kind of help commuters on their boring journeys have something fun to do.
And thus he created the Game & Watch.
Nintendo first entered the kind of handheld gaming world with the Game & Watch, which was kind of an LED games console, not even what we would consider a console today, really. Each of them was only preloaded with one game, so you couldn't put multiple games into that console. But it was still really popular. People liked having a handheld gaming device to take with them.
The 70s would become known as the golden age of arcade games. People crowded around machines, placing coins on the screen to reserve their turn. The 80s came rolling in, and with it, a massive advancement in gaming technology. But with it came many more consoles manufactured to capitalize on the rise of gaming. From Pong clones to home computers, most of which weren't functioning as promised. Before long, the market was saturated in off-brand consoles, and choosing one which worked as intended became a minefield. This climate would be known as the video game crash, aka the Atari shock.
In the 80s, video games felt like they were just reaching new heights and just getting more and more popular. But then actually there was something that's known as the video game crash. What had happened was a lot of companies were just churning out kind of lower quality games really quickly to try and hit that market and make money out of it, basically. So this led to a crash where people didn't really have faith in video games for a little while. Nintendo introduced a thing called the seal of quality, which just meant that they were going to guarantee that the games they were producing were going to reach a really high quality level, and meant that people could have faith in the games they were buying again.
The year is 1983, summer in Japan. The video game recession is at its height, with companies going bankrupt and global video game stock depleting by almost 97%. After years of work, Nintendo released a product which would change the video game climate forever. It is called the Famicom, known to the West as the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Okay. Nintendo, a quick-loading cartridge system with over 60 of the hottest titles ever. Games like Batman, a life and death struggle to end the evil Joker's reign of terror and save Gotham City. Games like Super Mario Brothers, a battle to rescue the Mushroom Princess from the evil Koopa Turtles. Go for the joystick for extra control, or go to infrared for remote control. The hottest games are on Nintendo, the world's #1 game system.
Nintendo had developed the Famicom, the family computer. And this was a video game system that had more than just one game on it. You could actually swap out the cartridges and play lots of different games on it. So Japan was protected from this international video game market crash because Nintendo was doing really well in Japan with the Famicom from 1983 to 1985.
The Famicom console was released in Japan originally and was called the Famicom, but it then came out in the US and in Europe as the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES. That was their first really popular at-home console. It became the thing to have across the world, especially for kids.
But at that time, the industry was very skeptical of video games. This enormous market crash had damaged the reputation of video games. And so they went to great lengths to distinguish their new system from all of the video game consoles that had gone before. At that time, 1985, VHS and Betamax videos were cool, and so they made the Nintendo Entertainment System look like a VHS, with cassettes that went in sideways.
ファミリーコンピュータの楽しいカセット情報。シングルス、ダブルスの本格テニスをコンピュータと技比べ。
The NES became a staple for the development of video games and their longevity in an otherwise uncertain climate. The system was affordable and reliable, being marketed with the Nintendo seal of quality, countering concerns for potential faults. With the release of The Legend of Zelda and Super Metroid, Nintendo became synonymous with its characters and iconography. It also provided the public with the Zapper, the first widely distributed light gun designed for games such as Duck Hunt and Hogan's Alley. However, nothing would prepare Nintendo for what might have been its most significant decision yet. Super Mario Bros.
And really, I don't think you can mention all of those early Nintendo games without mentioning the soundtracks to them. Koji Kondo, the composer to all of those early Nintendo games, is just a master, I think, at creating those sounds and effects and melodies that just get stuck in your head forever.
Nintendo's first big success was Donkey Kong. It was a coin-operated arcade game, and that really made its name worldwide. It just became huge. It was one of the first sort of platform games. It introduced the world to Mario, or whatever we knew him as Jumpman at the time, and it was a big hit everywhere in the world. It was big in Japan, it was big in North America, big in Europe. So that really established Nintendo as a force in video games. And then a few years later, it brings out the Nintendo Entertainment System, its first proper home video game console, and that has Super Mario Bros., which is, a wonderful game even now, huge at the time, and that really established Nintendo as the leader of the video game market.
I mean, Nintendo became so popular around the world because of how initially simple, but how gorgeously complex and gorgeously well-designed its games are. I mean, you look at things like, let's take Super Mario, the level 1-1, for example. I actually spoke years ago to Shigeru Miyamoto about how he went about creating this. In level 1-1, a player will encounter absolutely everything that they possibly need to understand how the game works. And so in subsequent levels, it's what they know, what the game can assume that they already know about it, is challenged. So the very first little bit that Mario runs along and he jumps up and he hits the box and the mushroom comes out, it's actually very hard for a player to avoid that mushroom, because the game wants you to run into it and discover Mario can make himself bigger. And that's one core mechanic of the game right there that you've discovered without any tutorials, without being told. You've just found it out for yourself. And that's the beauty of a Nintendo game. They want, I think at the core of every good Nintendo game is the joy of discovery, the joy of curiosity. And that is, I think that's inherently Shigeru Miyamoto's thing. That's Legend of Zelda to a T. It's all about discovery. It's all about going out into the world and seeing what you can find and seeing what you can uncover.
In the late 80s, I was living in America. I didn't have a Nintendo console myself, but after school I was so excited to walk to Danny's house and play Duck Hunt with the light gun on his Nintendo Entertainment System. There was nothing more exciting. And Super Mario Brothers blew my mind.
There's just so many fascinating elements to early Nintendo design. I mean, Mario, right? Take for example Mario. Mario's got his blue overalls, he's got his red hat, he's got his mustache, he's got a big nose. All of those things that make Mario Mario were done just because it made him easier to animate. It was just cutting corners essentially. He was blue and red so that he would stand out on the background. Number one, he had a hat so that they wouldn't have to animate any hair. He had a mustache so that you didn't have to see his mouth and he wouldn't have to talk or make sounds or do anything like that. Every little thing about that is just very clever design. And that was Miyamoto. That was early Nintendo to a T. I always remember he described Goombas as suspicious mushrooms, because you have the mushrooms that let you power up and you've got one extra life, and then the Goombas are suspicious because they're a little bit shady, and I always find that very funny because it's like, suspicious mushrooms. Okay, how does one go about making one of those?